Where is Krell?
In a world full of monsters, demons, and uncaring gods, there are few races who suffer more than men. Cursed with brutally short lives compared to those of the elder races, even without the world's many dangers considered, many humans have sought out ways to extend their time from mere decades to centuries, or even longer. This quest for immortality reached a climax during the life of Nagash, the Great Betrayer, with the birth of necromancy and undeath into the world. Since those ancient times, many men have delved into the dark lore of necromancy in an attempt to achieve ultimate power and immortal life. But very few have ever come close to claiming Nagash's empty throne. Frederick von Hall, Dieter Helschnitt, and Kaden, all mighty necromancers who have risen over the ages to try and claim supreme authority over the undead. But none have come closer than the feared master necromancer named Heinrich Kemmler. Prepare yourself, listener, as we delve into the history of a man worthy of Nagash's power. The Lichemaster's tale began 5 centuries ago in the great imperial city of Nuln, if some vague rumors are to be believed. He was fortunate enough to be born into a family of at least some wealth, for Kemmler's father was an avid collector of many types of literature. This desire for knowledge seemed to have been passed down, as young Heinrich quickly mastered the ability to read and often would spend time in his father's study attempting to learn new languages and decipher complex texts. Yet as he grew into a proper young man, Kemmler noticed all too swiftly the adverse effects that aging began to have on his parents. He swiftly came to the decision that mortality deserved no place in his future. Around this time, Heinrich felt a strange compulsion calling to him from a hidden drawer concealed within the study. Easily discovering how to uncover the bizarre script, he realized within moments that before him lay dark and forbidden lore. Poorly translated copies of none other than the infamous Books of Nagash, spoken about by scholars in hushed whispers. That fateful day, the young man took his first unflinching steps towards unlimited power and immortality. Once more, fate smiled upon Kemmler in a twisted fashion, as experimentation showed that he possessed the rare talent of being able to sense and shape the winds of magic. With nothing but half-true written instruction to guide him, Heinrich dove into necromancy without fear and proved to be an adept student. It wasn't long before he left home and began wandering the old world, collecting what scraps of dark lore he could discover and increasing his skill with each passing day. By his 40th year, Kemmler already could raise entire graveyards full of corpses with ease. After this point, the Lichemaster spent the next few centuries wandering the old world in search of powerful artifacts and dark lore. He would stop at nothing to acquire some inkling of further knowledge, as his power continued to swell. Eventually, delving through forgotten libraries and ancient crypts wasn't enough, so Kemmler sought out more substantial sources for what he desired. He began raiding wizards' towers and dark temples, slaughtering any necromancer or vampire who dared stand against him. This led to finding much higher quality arcane knowledge, and is likely where Heinrich slowly gathered the various magical items that would become his most prized possessions. This endless crusade against other dark sorcerers is what truly began to add infamy to Kemmler's name, as he defeated numerous powerful cults and eldritch abominations across the old world. In Bretonnia, he famously defeated the seemingly unstoppable master necromancer cabal known as the Council of Nine. Years later, Heinrich scattered the Charnel Congress in the Empire, who rumor has it faced the famous duo of Gotrek and Felix some time later. Far to the south in the Tilian capital of Merigliano, he would conquer Lady Camilla of Lamia, sacking her den full of precious lore and forcing her to flee disgracefully into the wilderness. The Necromancer's most famous victory, however, would be over the Liches of the Black Circle, horrifically powerful creatures that lurked in the crypts beneath capital Vermisach. He bound the magical beings to his will, and from that point onward took up the title of Lichemaster. Beyond annihilating rivals and plundering their vaults, however, Heinrich also spent much of his time preparing various complex plots in the many nations of men. Often he would use his magic to disguise himself, acting as an advisor to kings and emperors to move the very course of history more in his favor. Not all of his schemes paid off, though. Occasionally, some frustrating do-gooder or noble annoyance would stumble upon his works and disrupt them. The most notable case of this was La Massentelle Abbey, an ancient holy temple in Bretonnia that had been built during the reign of the first king, Gilles le Breton, by a mysterious benefactor from the east. The Lichemaster had long ago cast his hungry gaze upon the abbey, as it was here the Bretonians kept the most powerful and accursed items. Unfortunately, the protective wards guarding it were absurdly powerful, and the damsel's gift of foresight always ensured an army of knights would be waiting to defend it. Often, the Duke of Quenelles would personally lead such engagements, and thus the Lichemaster grew to deeply despise their line. Little did he realize this hated rivalry would only get worse in the ages to come. All of this had been mere child's play, however, compared to the second most defining event that would occur in Kemmler's life. Roughly 50 to 100 years before the modern age, the Necromancer's power had grown to mind-numbing levels, and his knowledge of dark lore and necromancy was second to none save Nagash himself. Thus, in a repeat of history, he would prepare a ritual to dominate the lands of the living from the Grey Mountains. But as had happened with Nagash and Van Hal, this moment was to be interrupted by enemies. The Lichemaster found himself confronted by the combined might of all his rivals from over the years. Necromancers and vampires united under a singular objective to slay Kemmler once and for all. Known as the Battle of 10,000 Skulls, massive undead armies battled as the skies burned with magic unleashed by both sides. The Lichemaster stood alone, but his power was truly incredible, and the earth shuddered from his frantic barrages of spells and counterspells. Yet as the battle reached its climax, something went terribly wrong. A force that had always been with him since he first discovered those forbidden texts in his father's office was suddenly gone. A hollow emptiness remained, and from that void Heinrich felt his strength slipping. He realized that without question, should this battle continue, he would die. Full of rage and denial about this sudden weakness, Kemmler refused to allow death to claim him here. With a final anguished cry, he gathered a colossal amount of magic and unleashed it as a devastating explosion. The resulting fallout ended the battle instantly, scattering those who weren't incinerated and leaving the battlefield as a smoking ruin. Although ultimately Heinrich had claimed victory, his body was broken and his mind shattered. All that remained was a crippled, half-sane old man. After the Battle of 10,000 Skulls, Kemmler wandered the Grey Mountains and Border Princes for decades. With his power gone, the former necromancer struggled to survive as a beggar on the fringes of civilization. That is until one day, a familiar feeling from a forgotten time long ago caught Heinrich's attention, luring him once more up into the steeps of the Grey Mountains. He journeyed for weeks without rest, despite the cold and treacherous terrain, until finally stumbling upon a frozen lake in the imperial calendar year of 2491. Compelled to continue forwards, Kemmler discovered a massive burial mound that towered above him. Sigils covered the ancient barrow, clearly magically crafted runes and wards meant to contain whatever being rested within. Stumbling forwards, the old man knelt before the tomb and read a history of blood and slaughter inscribed upon the stone. He read the tale of the Chaos Champion Krell the Holdbreaker, the Lord of the Undead, the Butcher of Karak Ungor, the Doom of Karak Varn. Once a champion of Khorne, Krell devastated the Dwarven realms until he was slain by Grimble Ironhelm at Karak Kadrin. Yet his story didn't end there, as his corpse was taken by his followers to the Grey Mountains, and entombed there until it was discovered by Nagash the Undying. Having returned once more to life, and searching for his crown of sorcery, the Great Necromancer saw a potential lord to lead his legions, and decided to raise Krell as his own. Thus, Nagash wrestled Krell's soul away from the Dark Gods, and offered him eternal life to seek battle as an undead wight, instead of settling for the blood-soaked abyss Khorne had tossed him into. Resurrected as his right hand, Krell would go on to cut a bloody swath through Sigmar's dwarven allies at the Battle of the River Reich, until the Great Necromancer himself was defeated by the God King. However, while most of the undead crumbled away, the Lord of the Undead cut his way free and led his doomed legion out. It would take months of bloody pursuit before Sigmar would catch up to the White King at the Battle of Glacier Lake and finally bring an end to his campaign of destruction and death. Here, the dwarves and men of the newly founded empire constructed a magical tomb to seal away the threat once and for all. Stunned by such an incredible find, hatred welled up within Kemmler as the irony of his situation dawned on him. Of course, fate would mock him in such a way, allowing him to discover the greatest treasure a necromancer could find after his powers had long since deserted him. In those moments of dark contemplation, sinister voices whispered to the fallen sorcerer. Sultry tones that promised glory he so rightly deserved, to return the power that had so unjustly been stolen from him. In the shattered remains of Kemmler's mind, a spark of desire reignited an inferno of will. That night, a bargain was struck between Madman and Laughing Gods. In return for slaughter in their name, the Dark Gods granted the mortal the return of all the powers he had once held, and thus, with a rumble of ominous thunder, the Lichemaster was reborn. Finally restored, Heinrich Kemmler screeched with triumph and unleashed his sorcerous might against Krell's tomb, obliterating the wards containing them. Moments later, a red-armored fist smashed the heavy obsidian door aside, and out stepped Krell, his infamous Black Axe at his side, as the Lichemaster returned him to unlife once more. With one of the world's greatest warriors as his new champion, bodyguard, and general, Kemmler knew exactly where he wished to go to announce his return to power. Raising the wights contained within the Glacier Lake, known as the Doomed Legion, to act as his army's core, the Necromancer marched directly west towards Bretonnia to conquer La Macental Abbey once and for all. Resurrecting hundreds upon hundreds of corpses as he went along, the Lichemaster made no secret of his approach towards the holy site, and was delighted to discover the Bretonians had already rallied a sizable force under the current Lord of Quenelles, Duke Tancred. That night, the 13th Battle of La Macental Abbey took place, with Bretonian chivalry and lances crashing against shambling hordes. Although the Necromancer's army was massive, and Krell proved to be virtually unstoppable, things began to go awry after hours of fighting. Despite his immense power, Kemmler found the wards defending the shrine were as potent as ever, causing the undead to be sapped of the very power which animated them, and slowing the effectiveness of his troops. To make matters worse, Duke Tancred was a brilliant general and a mighty warrior, leading devastating charges against the undead but not allowing his cavalry to be surrounded and pinned in. Although the Lichemaster may have been able to win eventually, it was only a matter of time until Bretonnian reinforcements arrived. Thus, Kemmler, chafing at the indignity of a loss so early into his return, summoned Krell to him and the two fled the battlefield. Unfortunately for the Master Necromancer, Duke Tancred had remembered this ancestral foe of his kingdom, and swore then and there to hunt down the Lichemaster once and for all, in the name of the lady. Thus the two would clash on many occasions over the years, whenever Kemmler tried to enact schemes in Bretonnia, deepening his hatred for the nation of chivalry into something borderline obsessive. After the 13th Battle of La Macental Abbey, the next major strike Heinrich would undertake was against a much different foe. Subtly guided by the whispers of the Chaos Gods, the Necromancer turned his attention to the enchanted forest of Athel Loren. In the winter of 2495, while most of the forest spirits slept, he entered the forest under a cloak of mists and shadows, to easily bypass the outer defenses guarding the Fey realm from intruders. Krell was left to pursue other missions elsewhere, as his corrupted form would be like a beacon to the watchful eyes protecting Athel Loren. Carefully, Heinrich followed secret paths until arriving at a truly massive burial ground known as the Cairnost, where many barbarian hordes had been buried. Discarding the spells concealing him, Kemmler stepped onto the grave soil and made his preparations for a grand ritual to raise all its vengeful dead. By the time patrolling Glade Riders spied the elderly man and spurred to the attack, it was too late. Thousands of wights, zombies, and skeletons burst from the ground, and in a matter of moments the elves were butchered. Cackling at his success, the Lichemaster prepared to invade Bretonnia with his newfound army, but paused when he felt a sudden compulsion to instead direct his forces against the heart of the forest itself. Thus, he gestured for his legions to march, easily perceiving through the magics that attempted to confuse interlopers, and speared directly for the Oak of Ages itself. This proved to be an erroneous decision, as although the Necromancer had timed his entry into Athel Loren to take advantage of their winter lethargy, not all the forest spirits were fully at rest. So when a host of screaming dryads charged out from the trees with the mighty tree lord Durthu leading them, things descended into unexpected chaos. The Battle of the Cairns was a brutal affair, the full details of which can be learned in the Durthu Legendary Lord video during his famous battle section, for those interested. In the end, despite nearly slaying the most ancient elder of the forest with bombardments of raw magical power, Kemmler was forced to retreat after Wood Elf reinforcements ambushed the glade to further support Durthu. This loss proved exceptionally irritating, but at the least the Lichemaster had succeeded in disrupting the fitful sleep of the dead beneath Athel Loren, and his necromancy would go on to poison its deep roots for many years. Heinrich swiftly reunited with Krell, and the two returned to their wanderings, the Necromancer planting agents in nations and castles across the old world to prepare for future activities. The most notable of these was a young acolyte he took on in the Empire named Daniken. The apprentice Necromancer was a native to Reichland, and after swearing himself to the Lichemaster, was carefully moved into place for an important plot to take place years later. However, Kemmler was forced to return to Bretonnia once more, as word reached him that his cabals and acolytes were being discovered and purged by one very determined Bretonnian lord, Duke Tancred. Enraged at this glorified pig farmer's constant interference, the Necromancer decided it was time to end things once and for all. He and Krell set off for Quenelles with all haste, carefully setting a trail of breadcrumbs that would lead the heroic dolt right to them. At long last, 10 years after their first meeting, the final battle between Heinrich Kemmler and Duke Tancred of Quenelles took place on Montfort Bridge, a crucial crossing point on the winding road between La Macental Abbey and the great city of Paravon. The battlefield greatly favored the undead, as while the bridge was large enough to accommodate a sizable force, it didn't allow the room for complex maneuvers or strategies. The Duke had hoped his peasant levies would be able to hold long enough for catapult and archer fire to weaken the undead legions, but this proved to be a costly mistake, as the giggling Necromancer simply sent much of his Graveguard legions, led by Krell, through the fast-moving waters themselves. The armored dead simply walked across the riverbed before emerging unconcerned and surrounding those upon the bridge. The infantry were utterly slaughtered, trapped between Krell's axe and Kemmler's sorcery. Raising the butchered peasants back as zombies, thousands of corpses crossed the bridge and descended upon the wedge of Bretonnian knights, who seemed small in comparison. Yet where even brave men might have fled, Duke Tancred simply raised his lance and shouted a blessing to the lady for her strength in this dark hour. Inspired by this display, the knights of his army took up the call and as one launched into a full charge with Tancred at the point of the formation. A golden light suffused the howling knights, and Kemmler glared in disbelief as they charged headlong straight for him upon the bridge. Surely the idiots knew the momentum of their attack would be spent long before they reached him. The knights impacted the undead like a steel fist punching through rotten wood, as corpses were crushed beneath flailing hooves or launched backwards like ragdolls. Impossibly, they kept coming, however, seemingly endless vigor granting the knights inhuman strength as they smashed full through the zombie line, pulverizing the skeletons and scattering the cowering ghouls all arranged before them. Krell and his doomed legion ran forward to intercept, but a blinding holy light from Tancred's shield caused them all to stutter and slow, save Krell himself. The champion of the Lichemaster and Duke Tancred crashed together in a thunderclap of steel, as both lashed out with their weapons. Krell's black axe decapitating Tancred's horse, but the Duke returning the favor with a crushing blow to the White's plated chest. The two dueled with blows so swift as to deny belief, Tancred's morning star blazing with divine light as he matched the black axe blow for blow. Finally, the remaining knights smashed their way through the doomed legion, and with blessed blades Krell was slowly forced backwards. Kemmler barked out guttural syllables in anger as the wind of Shyish gathered to him, the resulting spells surging across the battlefield to reknit broken bodies and invigorate those creatures still fighting. It proved to be too late, however, as while Krell continued to butcher the odd knight who stepped too close, the Duke forced him up against the bridge's edge, and with a resounding cry smashed his morning star into the White's helm with a sickening crunch of metal and bone. The Lord of the Undead bellowed before stumbling backwards, and like a puppet with his strings cut, collapsed over the side into the swift waters below. A scream of rage and hatred issued out from Kemmler as he saw his champion fall, pulling back his sorcery from repairing his army to unleashing a torrent of black magic against the Duke. All the brave knights standing by Tancred screamed in anguish as they withered away to naught but ash in mere seconds. But the Grail shield of Quenelles blazed as if struggling to hold back the storm. Heinrich knew this battle needed to end now, that if the Duke were to fall, the cowardly Bretonnians would abandon their so-called honor in a heartbeat and flee the field. But the man just would not die. The Lichemaster bent the skull staff forwards, and grunted as he continued to pour every ounce of power he had into murdering this constant thorn, grinning with satisfaction as he saw the Duke's features twist with pain and his armor beginning to rust at impossible speed. Yet step by step, Tancred closed the distance between the two, until at last the two stood mere yards apart. Kemmler felt panic rising within him, but could see that death was rapidly approaching for Tancred. Although his shield provided some defense, the item couldn't repel so much raw power, and thus the Duke's body began to fail him bit by bit. Barking out with annoyance, Kemmler tore the Curse of Years away, and gestured his hand forward to unleash a hail of screaming souls to tear his foe apart. Tancred rolled aside with impossible agility despite his now withered form, and launched forward to finish this rivalry at long last. However, Despite being a wizened old necromancer, Kemmler was no slouch in combat, as his blade looted from Krell's burial mound licked out to block blow after blow. Shadows vomited out from Kemmler's dark cloak, and he seemingly vanished into thin air, a swirling maelstrom where he had stood moments before. The Lichemaster had no intention of a fair fight so close to victory, using his sorcery to confuse his opponent, while he slashed open Tancred from unexpected angles time and time again. Yet as he raised his blade to deliver the killing blow, the Necromancer saw too late that his opponent had been simply trying to endure until the proper moment. Crying out to the lady for strength, Duke Tancred swung his glowing Morningstar with all the might he could manage, and slammed the weapon directly into Heinrich's chest. The Lichemaster screamed in agony as he felt ribs shatter and cave beneath the blow, summoning all the death magic in the air to him for one final spell. With an agonized screech, the Necromancer exploded a wave of black flames outward and vanished. With the apparent death of Kemmler, the undead legion collapsed within moments, and the Bretonnians cheered, though their victory cries fell silent, as they saw the corpse of Duke Tancred lying on Montfort Bridge. Although the living dead had been defeated, it was with heavy hearts the Bretonnians knew it had been at great cost. Many miles distant from the Battle of Montfort Bridge, Kemmler crashed to the ground from his mist form with a ragged yelp. A deep anger simmered inside him as he slowly stood, dark magic already repairing all the damage to his insides from Tancred's blow. Beside him, Krell slowly stood as well, his armor and bones reknitting with disturbing speed. This had been another setback, nothing more. But at the very least, his hated rival, the lowly Duke of Quenelles, was finally dead. Cackling madly to himself, the Lichemaster gestured for Krell to follow and set off to the northeast. He tired of Bretonnia, and the time had come to see other grand plans to fruition. For almost 20 years, the pair would wander the old world to enact various schemes, the Lichemaster laying into place many of his future machinations, and ensuring those prepared in the past were secure. He once more checked in on young Daniken, who had since taken up residence in Castle Reichgard as an apprentice to the warrior priest of Sigmar there. This would make for some interesting possibilities. The time was not yet right though, so Heinrich returned to the Grey Mountains once more after his travels. As the pair headed up into the eastern mountains of Bretonnia, however, a most unlikely individual sought them out. Kemmler could sense the approach of another powerful practitioner of the dark arts and made his preparations, summoning forth an army of armored wights and awaiting the newcomer in a mist-wreathed barrow among the peaks. The Necromancer was surprised to see none other than Manfred von Karstein walk into the light provided by the full moon, having heard that the vampire was deceased following the affairs at Hel Finn some time ago. The Lord of Sylvania had come with a proposition for Kemmler, an offer to bring war and death to all the races of Order in one fell swoop. Full of bitterness towards those civilizations that had left him behind, the Lichemaster eagerly agreed to assist in this task. So a pact was struck between the Barrow Legion and the von Karsteins. The two Lords of Undeath traveled east with great haste into the Border Princes, making for a series of valleys that were one of the few paths leading to the dwarf capital of Karazakarak. Manfred explained that the Everchild, daughter of Ulthuan's spiritual queen, had recently arrived in the Dwarven realm as an ambassador. The two of them were here to ensure that this budding alliance did not take root. They made preparations and awaited the delegation to walk directly into their trap. We'll cover the war in the Border Princes later on in the famous battle section. After the events in the Border Princes, Kemmler and Krell followed Manfred von Karstein back to Sylvania, where they briefly joined the undead court in Castle Drakenhof. However, the Lichemaster always chafed at the idea of answering to another, and it wasn't long before he grew irritated with the leeches surrounding him. Refusing to follow any purpose but his own, Heinrich quickly left with Krell and headed northwest towards Reichland. Besides, if his agents had reported correctly, then it was time for his grandest plan to be enacted. When he arrived in the lands of Karl Franz, however, a rather large problem presented itself almost immediately. A truly colossal herd of beastmen were on the move in the province, and carried with them a massive herdstone that pulsed with mind-numbing levels of power. The Bray shaman, Urzlak Cripplehorn, had been guided by Tzeentch to bring the Menhir to a ritual site of potent power atop an ancient barrow, and at midnight on Hexensnacht would unleash its terrible power. The ritual, if completed, would turn everyone living in the forests of the Empire into beastmen within a matter of seconds. To make things worse, the Menhir was such a dense concentration of magic that Kemmler's sorcery fizzled to nearly nothing in its presence. The Lichemaster knew this ritual could not be allowed to succeed. If it did, the Empire would be torn apart by the Children of Chaos, and all his careful plans would be in ruin. The answer to the situation thankfully appeared, however, in the form of a strange duo that Heinrich observed attempting to halt the Brayherd's advance. A one-eyed slayer and his human companion named Gotrek and Felix. Although the poet held little interest to him, Kemmler's eyes were drawn to the axe of Gotrek, which clearly pulsed with enough power to destroy the herdstone, could the two get close enough. So, Kemmler used his magic to disguise himself as a ragged beggar near the final night of the ritual, approaching the heroes and calling himself Hans the Hermit. He claimed to have lived in this area for decades and was a grave robber, so he was intimately familiar with the barrows the Beastman Warherd had camped on, and using secret routes, he could get them close enough to the Menhir to destroy it. Although none of the virtuous band trusted Hans, they had little choice and followed his plan. They did attempt to lock him in chains as to be a reliable guide, but the next morning discovered the hermit had somehow vanished as if into thin air. Glad to be done with such a humiliating ruse, Kemmler quickly transported to the local lords, and disguising himself as an advisor once more, convinced many of the young rulers of the area to ride out to take place in the final battle. Cackling with glee at his schemes, the Lichemaster watched from a safe distance as all his puppets moved into place and danced their part. In the end, the herdstone was destroyed, but at great cost, as thousands of Empire soldiers and beastmen lay dead. With the Menhir shattered, the winds of magic were restored to normalcy, and Kemmler sprang into action. He effortlessly raised tens of thousands of zombies to unlife, immediately setting them upon the survivors as he taunted them through countless dead throats. The remaining heroes fled for their lives into the fog towards Castle Reichgard, all the while being pursued by direwolves, fellbats, and black knights, sent to terrify and exhaust them. Heinrich knew the best way to defeat his enemy was to constantly barrage them with terror and give not a moment's rest. Whenever they attempted to stop and camp, men wounded or sick from early engagements would die in their sleep, only to be immediately raised as zombies and murder those sharing their tents. The psychological warfare took its toll, and by the time the defenders reached Castle Reichgard, they were all emotionally and physically drained. It didn't take long for Kemmler's zombie horde to catch up and surround the castle, his legions already numbering well over 100,000 strong, as he raised all of the dead he found along the march. From that point forward began the siege of Castle Reichgard, the most well-fortified and stalwart fortress in Reichland, save for Altdorf itself. It had full stores of food and water, a fast-moving moat surrounding all sides, a small harbor capable of sending out ships for supplies, and rune-crafted walls designed specifically to repel demons and the undead. Yet despite all of these preparations and defenses, one of the mightiest keeps in all of the Empire collapsed beneath the Lichemaster's onslaught in a mere 6 days. Long had he been preparing for this, and his apprentice, Daniken, was ready to do his job. Under Kemmler's guidance, he had used poison to blind and wither the warrior priest into a frail old man, used dark magic to shatter the dwarf runes protecting the walls, and poisoned all of the food and water in the entire castle. Furthermore, the Lichemaster had also been watching the castle for an opportunity when the Graf had returned wounded from battling Norskins at the village of Grimmenhagen. The Lord of Castle Reichgard died shortly after returning home, but such was his wife's grief that she refused to believe he was gone. To make matters worse, the greedy steward of the keep convinced her that the Graf was merely in a coma, so that he might extort her for gold in order to call in the specialist needed to heal the Graf. Then came Kemmler. The Lichemaster appeared to the Graf's wife in her dreams as a kindly old man, promising her with soft-spoken words that he could return her husband to life again if she would but let him in. Endless zombies, graveguard, crypt ghouls, and skeletons assaulted the walls in constant assaults from repulsive siege engines made of flesh, bone, and wood, while from the air constant swarms of fellbats attacked, led by Krell himself mounted on a horrific abyssal terror, created from stitched-together wyvern parts. In the end, though, the keep was totally overwhelmed despite the heroic efforts of Gotrek and Felix, as Kemmler led his wights through the secret back entrance to attack the keep from all possible directions. Although the troublesome Gotrek and Felix managed to escape by the skin of their teeth, the two were essentially dead men walking due to curses and sickness. Victorious at last, Heinrich prepared his ultimate ritual. The goal was simple. Using the ancestral lords of the seat of Reichland, the Graf and his wife, Kemmler could unleash a spell upon their corpses in a perverse version of a harvest festival that would cause the entirety of the Reichland to wither and die. All the crops would rot, the water would cause only infection, and nothing living would remain. The Empire's capital province would become the first major piece in the Lichemaster's new Kingdom of Death. Unfortunately, in the end, things didn't quite work out that way. Against all reason and odds, somehow Gotrek and Felix had survived, and returned with powerful allies to face Kemmler one final time. They snuck into the throne room, where the ritual was being cast alongside a light wizard, priest of Mor, amethyst wizard, and a company of Reichsguard, led by the son of the Graf. So engulfed was the Necromancer with his ritual that he failed to notice the party of heroes until Gotrek announced their presence by killing a dwarf zombie he had spotted. Immediately alerted to his foes, the Lichemaster turned and unleashed a torrent of magic as Krell and the Doomed Legion surged forward to engage the interlopers. The resulting battle was a titanic display of power and skill by both sides, as legendary heroes fought against the duo of death. Despite being outnumbered by 2 master wizards and a highly skilled priest of Mor, Heinrich was more than a match for them, and had his foes constantly on the back foot. While distracted, however, the son of the Graf managed to reach his parents' side, and with a cry of anguish, beheaded their struggling corpses to free their souls. The backlash of magic struck the Necromancer like a poisoned dagger, causing him to stumble in agony. At this moment, Gotrek Gurnison finally gained the upper hand against Krell, and with a roaring cry cleaved his legendary axe into the White King's chest, and felled the Lord of the Undead as Grimble Ironhelm had millennia ago. With his champion dead, Kemmler reached deep into his soul, and with an enraged cry, unleashed an incredible surge of dark magic against his foes. Even Gotrek, with his natural resistance to magic being a dwarf, and the Axe of Grimner's runic protection, was completely paralyzed and started withering away. It was over. These foolish heroes had underestimated the Lichemaster for the last time, and now they all would die. Yet, as his victory seemed assured, the Necromancer cried out as an arrow from seemingly nowhere struck him in the back. Another followed soon after, piercing his shoulder and interrupting his channeled spell for just a moment too long. Gotrek surged across the room and brought his axe flashing up in a flurry of blows to end Kemmler's long life once and for all. The Necromancer attempted to defend himself, but his tomb blade was knocked aside with ease, and as he raised his staff for defense, the Axe of Grimnir split it in two and cleaved deep into Heinrich's flesh, and the Necromancer was blown back by the explosion of released magic. Wounded, the Lichemaster had no other choice now. Suddenly dispersing into a whirlwind of mists and shadows, the formless Necromancer scooped up the scattered pieces of Krell, and with agony lacing his voice taunted his foes that this was merely a delay to his schemes, nothing more. With that, he fled Castle Reitgard into the Grey Mountains once more to lick his wounds and plan anew. That concludes the history of Heinrich Kemmler, at least up until the end times. For those wishing to read a more detailed account of the events of Castle Reitgard, I would heavily suggest picking up the Black Library novels Gotrek and Felix Shaman Slayer and Gotrek and Felix Zombie Slayer to enjoy the epic full tale. Now that his saga has been told, it's time to move on to the equipment section. The most impressive part of the Lichemaster's legacy is that he specializes in dueling against other powerful casters in the Warhammer Universe. It's no small feat to conquer enemy wizards on a consistent basis, especially when heavily outnumbered, such as when he defeated the Council of Nine in the Charnel Congress. The way Kemmler was able to accomplish these feats is due to his most noticeable magic item, the Skull Staff. Contrary to the way most staves function for casters, this one is a purely defensive artifact that specializes in countering and locating enemy mages. The large bird skull atop it will begin to noisily chatter to Kemmler whenever it senses magic in the vicinity, whether that be spells or items. None save the Lichemaster himself can understand its mad ramblings, but the potency of this arcane artifact is not to be underestimated, as it can sense magic at a surprising distance and instruct Heinrich to the source's exact location. This has allowed him to be immune to ambush by those seeking to combat him with eldritch artifacts or magic, while also granting Kemmler the ability to immediately locate hidden sources of power he seeks, like hidden grimoires contained within a wizard's tower. Furthermore, it enhances the Lichemaster's ability to dispel enemy casts, as the Skullstaff not only will reveal the origin point of a spell, but also the perfect counterspell needed to halt it. Whether this reservoir of knowledge is contained within the staff itself, or merely a focused extension of Kemmler's own studies, is unknown. The most powerful item wielded by Heinrich is by far his Cloak of Mists and Shadows. This enchanted piece of clothing is of the Lichemaster's own design, and is by far one of the most effective tools he possesses. To put it bluntly, the cloak allows him to transmute his body into a literal cloud of mist, surrounded by constantly swirling shadows. This can be used to functionally give him flight, and the ability to relocate his position at alarming speeds, providing the Necromancer with a crucial tool to shift anywhere on the battlefield in a matter of seconds. In addition, it can be used in a more combat-centric role, by rendering him essentially ethereal, as foes swing wildly into the roiling shadows to no avail. No mortal weapon can harm him while in this form. Only enchanted or blessed steel will be able to land a blow, but that's only if the enemy can even tell where the Necromancer is standing within the swirling maelstrom of darkness. The final magical item possessed by Heinrich Kemmler is his lethal cursed blade, simply known as the Chaos Tomb Blade. As the name would imply, the stories suggest he looted this artifact off the very same tomb he awakened Krell and the Doomed Legion from. This makes him one of the few, if not the only one, of the Lords of Undeath to wield a weapon of the Dark Gods. Strangely enough, the Tomb Blade is a flawless fit for the Necromancer, as it not only provides him with unholy vigor and strength, but has this particularly nasty ability. Should one be slain by this weapon, it will entrap the victim's soul and immediately grant their mortal form's use over to Kemmler. Thus, while leading his feared Graveguard in battle, Kemmler can replenish or even add to their ranks immediately with each opponent he strikes down. As that description may imply, between the Cloak of Mists and Shadows and the Chaos Tombblade, the Lichemaster is much more of a terror in close combat than one might expect. We'll delve more into this aspect of his character during the skills section, but in the meantime, there's one more important component to be observed. No talk about Kemmler is ever complete until his terrifying bodyguard is brought up. Krell, the Lord of Undeath. With very rare exceptions, these two are essentially inseparable, and when together are nearly unbeatable. While the Lichemaster brings the brains and spellcasting to the table, the sheer brawn and raw killing power is undoubtedly Krell's side of the deal. The White King, for all intents and purposes, is completely and utterly loyal to Kemmler without a shadow of a doubt, as the two are bound together at a very deep level. There are times when it isn't exactly clear which is the master and which is servant, but most of the time the Necromancer appears to be the one in control. As for what he can do, Krell is without a doubt one of the deadliest warriors in the Warhammer Fantasy Universe. The first thing worth observing is while Undeath has slowed him down a bit, it has also increased his durability to truly insane levels. And Krell was still one of Khorne's mightiest champions in life, which is no small boast. His skill and speed while wielding the Black Axe of Krell has been expertly honed for over 3,000 years, and it definitely shows, considering he went toe-to-toe with Gotrek at the height of the Slayer's skill, while often still fighting one or two additional Slayers at the same time. Krell's mastery with the blade is such that Krell specializes in killing blows, even against powerful large beasts like dragons. Coupled with his strength, there are very few who can survive more than a single strike. For his own equipment, the Holdbreaker relies on two items from his days as a Chaos Champion. The first is the Armor of the Barrows, his iconic set of blood red and rusted Chaos armor. Contrary to good sense, the passage of time has only strengthened this plate set instead of weakening it, and thanks to the blessings of Nagash, it acts as a beacon of entropy. This aura causes any magic weapon that strikes Krell to have its enchantments decay in an instant, rendering them completely mundane. There of course have been rare exceptions to this rule, such as the Axe of Grimnir wielded by Gotrek Garnison. His far more iconic item, however, is the Black Axe of Krell. This horrific weapon is the stuff of nightmares, as it's forged from a sentient form of obsidian that constantly sheds as Krell swings it around. Should one be wounded by the Black Axe, it will leave behind numerous tiny, jagged shards that will swiftly eat their way into the victim's bloodstream until arriving at their heart. Should this be allowed to occur, they'll eventually pierce the organ's walls and kill the opponent, painfully but quickly. It goes without saying that the Lichemaster chose incredibly well when raising the Lord of Undeath to serve him. That wraps up Krell's examination and the other equipment, which means the time has come to delve into Kemmler's various skills. By this point, it should be readily apparent that Heinrich Kemmler is indeed one of the strongest necromancers to have ever plagued the Warhammer world. While certainly not as powerful as Nagash at his height, the Lichemaster is a close second, despite his rather haggard and humble appearance. He has completely mastered the arts of necromancy and the lore of vampires, being one of the few individuals to be acknowledged as a Loremaster of it. In addition to having magic might and knowledge on par with individuals like Manfred von Karstein and Archon the Black, Kemmler, of course, brings some uniquely powerful skills to the table as he's still a living, functioning Master Necromancer. This position and his obsession with remaining immortal has afforded him access to an ability appropriately known as the Master of the Dead among Necromancers. Functionally, this means they possess the ability to raise those just slain in battle against the vampire counts into undead, more sophisticated than mere zombies with greater ease. In Kemmler's case, this is enhanced to an extreme, as he can raise up the recently slain, immediately bearing the power and skill of a graveguard, which is completely unheard of. Granted, it does require the use of his Chaos Tomb Blade to do so. The final notes worth making about Kemmler in this regard is that his ability as a necromancer is second to none still living. In the art of flesh crafting, which is molding the many aspects of corpses into new and horrific forms, he also retains such a title. He has demonstrated the ability to shape multiple corpses into terrible new forms, such as siege towers, catapults, and even a demented horse-like creature made of dead Bretonians in a matter of seconds. On top of that, his feat in Zombie Slayer, where Kemmler animated well over 100,000 undead of multiple tiers by himself, makes him truly a paragon of summoning and reanimation. The only other caster in the world who would be a worthy opponent for Heinrich in those specific matters would be Zacharias the Ever-Living, the current head of the Mortrarch vampiric bloodline. It should be noted that Manfred and Archon possess greater skill in purely combative magic most of the time, though during the end time section, that conversation will be focused more upon, as it's a rather complicated affair that comes to fruition. Something that is very unique to Kemmler, compared to his other Necromancer brethren, is that the Lichemaster is a fairly competent melee combatant. While he certainly doesn't possess the strength or speed displayed by vampires, he's certainly capable of defending himself and being a dangerous threat to other, even well-trained humans. When adding his various magic items to the equation, at that point Heinrich does leap up to being more than a match for most vampires and elder races, as he utilizes deception and trickery in his combat tactics, to an absurd degree. Many would-be victors have been gutted by what they assumed to simply be a typically weak and cowardly mage. Beyond that, the Lichemaster has a truly astonishing constitution. To put the matter in a few words, this is an individual who, although technically human, managed to take 2 arrows to the back and get slashed by Gotrek's god-forged axe and still managed to completely escape. That is just absurd on so many levels. It should be no wonder he's proven so damn resilient against his rivals, when attacks that can seriously injure greater demons don't even manage to kill him. Another thing touched upon numerous times throughout this video is that Kemmler is one hell of a wizard buster. Thanks mainly to the information the Skull Staff rattles out constantly, there is no caster in the world capable of gaining an upper hand on Heinrich, as the instant something that can harm him is in play, he already knows. His vast knowledge of arcane matters in both necromancy and dark magic only deepens this fact, and throughout his entire storyline, the only mage who actually manages to go one-on-one with the Lichemaster and not be quite frankly crushed is Nagash's left hand, Archon the Black. Something we'll discuss more in depth during the end time section. The last skill that needs to be observed about Heinrich Kemmler is his ability as a manipulator. Although all the Lords of Undeath tend to be well known for their ability at spinning webs through which to accomplish their means, very few have had the success record of this wily necromancer. His skill at crafting disguises is actually quite impressive when displayed in the novels of Shaman Slayer and Zombie Slayer, and that's only the tip of the iceberg for him. It's well noted that at various points in his life, The Lichemaster acted as an advisor to entire nations by whispering words into the willing ears of kings and even emperors. Although it's never stated exactly what events were caused by Kemmler's interference, his extreme distaste for the civilizations of men, dwarves, and elves has likely led him to cause many schisms between those races. Many rumors suggest he was particularly skilled at fanning the flames between the Empire and Bretonnia, but such things will never be known for certain. That concludes the skills section for Heinrich Kemmler, so without further ado, let's step into the famous battle, the War in the Border Princes. Following the bargain struck in the Grey Mountains, Kemmler made his way to the most eastern valleys of the Border Princes, along with Manfred von Karstein and Krell. The plan was rather straightforward, as when the High Elves had passed through these lands to reach Karazakarak, they had butchered all the greenskin tribes who sought to waylay them. This made it all too simple for the undead allies to manipulate things in their favor. Heinrich couldn't help but approve of this stage in the plan, as he and Manfred used their magic to send whispers into the thoughts of the many tribes scattered throughout the Border Princes and the neighboring mountains. These small urges spoke of the mighty battle that awaited in the Eastern Valley for all who came, and how all those orcs and goblins that came before were brutally defeated. The ploy almost worked too well, as suddenly hordes of greenskins from miles around came pouring into the Border Princes, just in time to catch the delegation of elves with their dwarven honor guard on the march towards the coast from the Everpeak. The orc tribes sprung their ambush, howling down the mountainsides with a great roaring war cry that shook Scree from the peaks. At a gruff command from the elder Thane Orgrim, the dwarf honor guard locked their shield walls into place to form a bulwark of steel. Aliathra, the Everchild's princely consort, Yulthian, took to the skies on his noble griffin, Everswift. As the princess's swordmasters closed protectively around her, hundreds of elven archers smoothly knocked arrows and sent volleys of deadly shafts straight over the heads of their stout dwarf allies. To the amused distaste of the elven warriors, the valley ran red with filthy orc blood before the hour was out. It was only when a full half of the orc tribes had expended themselves that Manfred made his move. The sky suddenly darkened as whirling swarms of bats thundered out from caverns and cracks in the mountainsides. From the river that ran through the valley center stalked a cleverly concealed army of skeleton warriors, their sodden armor bearing the faded heraldry of the von Karsteins. A great phalanx of heavily armored wights marched up from the valleys below, Krell at their head, tirelessly grinding through the scree to block the delegation's escape. To the rear, the remnants of the orc tribes barred the route back to Karazakarak. Out from the clouds came a trio of gigantic bat-like terrorgeists, rotting jaws agape. One was swiftly intercepted by Yulthian upon Everswift, but even that lightning-fast warrior could not stop all three. The deafeningly shrill cries of the vile creatures burst the eardrums of the elf warriors below, as the beasts and their Strigoi riders plummeted downwards to feed. Worst of all, as the Lichemaster's dolorous chanting echoed from the mountainsides, every single one of the dead orcs that littered the slopes jerked back to life. Even the disembodied arms and hands of those cut to pieces by elf swordmasters and dwarf clansmen started to drag themselves toward the dwarf shield walls once more. The anarchy that followed was the antithesis of the ordered defense mounted by the allies earlier that day. As the sun began to disappear behind the mountains, the sheer number of undead began to tell. From above came flock upon flock of giant bats, the majority of which were incinerated by Aliathra's searing white magic, or struck by the wheeling great eagles that had accompanied the High Elves on their journey, but the rest plucked at the eyes and faces of the elf archers with blood-encrusted claws. To the fore, the undead minions of Krell had taken position, and as Krell waded into the dwarf lines with great sweeps of his dreaded Black Axe, his undead knights lowered their lances and charged. Some of the deathly cavalrymen, incorporeal fiends clad in flickering green flame, charged straight through the dwarf shield wall and onwards into the ranks of the High Elf swordmasters. they left the cold, white shells of dead dwarf veterans behind them, their souls ripped free from their bodies. It was too much for the dwarves. Krell had slain Thane Orgrim in personal combat, and under the White King's ensuing onslaught, the shield line began to buckle and break. Their long-bearded brethren, practically buried under shambling mounds of undead greenskins, were in no position to reinforce them. Manfred's skeletal horde bristled with hundreds of elven arrows sticking from eye sockets and spines, but, reinforced by their master's iron control over necromantic magic, they came on and did not stop until there was not a single arrow left in any elven quiver. The situation looked grim indeed. It was then that Kemmler cemented his reputation in the eyes of the von Karsteins forever. As the Lichemaster chanted, the dwarves that had died in the battle stumbled to their feet once more, heads hung, and fell upon the elven delegation, just as the Terragai circling in the skies above dived into their ranks once more. Against the horrified elves, the heavily armored dwarf corpses took a terrible toll. Runic axes rose and fell, slick with elven blood. Manfred's eerie laugh could be heard above the din of battle as the grotesque tableau played out, a macabre reminder of the War of the Beard between elf and dwarf. The elves were left with no choice but to flee, their great eagles already speeding away to bring word of this new treachery to the courts of Ulthuan. The dragon princes that formed Aliathra's reserve identified a weak spot in the undead line and charged, a shower of pallid limbs and broken bones left in the wake of their explosive exit from the jaws of Kemmler's trap. Amongst them came the elven princess upon the back of her bond horse, Salanir the Proud. Magical power crackled around the dragon princes as the remains of the elven delegation fought with the fury of Cain in order to secure their princess's escape. Just as it seemed the dragon princes would thunder headlong into the ranks of Krell's white army on the slopes below, Aliathra gave a triumphant shout, and the entire spearhead of cavalry galloped into the night air as if a bridge of mist had formed underneath them. It was then that Manfred himself finally struck, plunging from the mountain peaks upon a zombie dragon of awesome size. Von Karstein swooped down to intercept the fleeing princess. At his mental command, both remaining Terragais wheeled about to join him. As Aliathra shot like a dart of white light over the heads of Krell's army, the young elf prince Yulthian fought Manfred in a desperate aerial battle to ensure her escape. Up on the slopes of the mountains, the gloating Kemmler also had one last trick to play. Reaching out with tendrils of dark power, the Lichemaster infused the pursuing Terragais with necromantic energy, and they shot through the air with hellish speed. Turning in her saddle, Aliathra gestured fiercely and consumed one of the creatures in a blinding conflagration of magic, but the other plunged down towards her with a soul-searing screech that stunned the mage princess into unconsciousness. It snatched her and her horse up in its claws, wheeling around to rejoin the fray. Bereft of Aliathra's airborne enchantments, the dragon princes made decidedly graceless returns to the valley below. The high-altitude duel between Manfred and the High Elf Prince was reaching its bloody peak. For all Manfred's vampiric speed and the sheer draconic size of his undead mount, the High Elf and his griffin were just too nimble, darting in with lance and talon to strike over and over again. Only the armor of Tempelhof had protected Manfred from a lance shaft through his black heart. Then, just as Prince Yulthian aligned his predatory steed for another charge, Manfred smiled. As the last Terragais passed overhead, the corpse of Salanir the Proud fell out of the skies and bodily collided with the shocked elf prince, knocking him from his saddle. The griffin, momentarily distracted, was impaled through the neck on Manfred's blade. A split second later, the zombie dragon snapped its great rotten skull forward like a man-trap, and sunk its teeth into the noble griffin's head with a horrible crunch. At Manfred's command, the griffin's thrashing body was released. Its cooling corpse tumbled toward the valley below. Kemmler had brought the falling cadaver under his control before the beast hit the stony ground, and on lifeless wings it flew back to attack its former allies in the valley. Heinrich made note of Manfred's departing figure with the captured Everchild, but frankly was enjoying himself far too much with this grand performance to care. He remained behind, waving his hands as if conducting a horrid orchestra of death and murder as the remaining elves and dwarves were butchered. When the sun rose at the new dawn, only twisted amalgamations of fused dwarf and elf corpses remained in the valley, as a repulsive statement of what had occurred here. And that concludes the famous battle section for Heinrich Kemmler. That means it's time for the end time section. As is usual for this video, I will have timestamps in the description below, or the first comment, where if you would like to skip the end times because you're not interested or perhaps don't want it spoiled for you for some reason, then you can simply skip to the closing thoughts part of the video. So for those who have not joined me for the end times section before, it's much more informal than the rest of the video, as the end times are a bit of a complicated mess, and going incredibly in detail about it would take hours. So I will give kind of just an overview of what occurs. So in the opening scenes of the end times, one of the first things that happens is there's a great civil war in Bretonnia, with one side being Lewin Leoncoeur leading the loyal knights of Bretonnia who are loyal to the lady, and the other side being led by Lewin's bastard son, Malabad the Serpent. Malabad originally was losing the war against Lewin until he ended up receiving assistance from Archon the Black, who also brought with him Heinrich Kemmler and Krell, among with many other vampires and necromancers. So the first time we see Heinrich Kemmler in the end times is he's a little bit wounded still from his last engagement with Gotrek and Felix, and he's fairly stooped and doesn't seem to have much of his power anymore. He's dying, essentially, it looks like. He participates in the battle, but afterwards essentially vanishes because although they were doing very, very well, when the undead army under Malabad reaches the city of Caron, the Green Knight rides out and decapitates him, and the undead army pretty much gets annihilated and scatters. Archon the Black, of course, had already left by that point, but Archon was there to try and get into La Macental Abbey, but found that he could not, and he needed essentially some assistance. So he wandered off to Sylvania to take care of things there. Kemmler we would not see until Archon returned back to Bretonnia and met up with Kemmler once more in the Grey Mountains, before descending back into Bretonnia with the goal of going to La Macental Abbey, breaking it open, because it turns out that the reason the abbey was originally built so long ago was to contain Alakanesh, the Staff of Nagash, which is one of the most potent magical items in the Warhammer Fantasy Universe. While they're descending from the mountains, however, due to some machinations of the Dark Gods, and of course Malagor the Dark Omen himself, a army of Bretonnians led by Duke Tancred II, who is the son of Duke Tancred I that Kemmler fought at both the 13th Battle of La Macental Abbey and the Battle of Montfort Bridge, was leading the army, and there was a big fight between the two forces. In the end times, there is basically a big engagement between those two armies, and although Duke Tancred II, he fights Krell, and doesn't do super well, but manages to survive, and then he ends up going up against Heinrich Kemmler one-on-one. Kemmler uses his pretty powerful Cloak of Mist and Shadows to basically make himself very hard to detect and see, and constantly zips around doing little cuts and nicks off of Duke Tancred II, much like he did with Duke Tancred I, until Duke Tancred II actually manages to, by being patient and trying to find a pattern, figures out where Kemmler is going to appear and stabs him with a holy blade the moment he materializes. This pretty much mortally wounds Kemmler, but before Tancred can deliver the killing blow, as he is being withered by Kemmler's magic, Krell literally comes up behind him and just decapitates him. So unfortunately he wasn't paying close enough attention, and Krell just severs his spine and kills him. The Lichemaster, of course, at this point was all too delighted to keep resurrecting Tancred II's corpse and then killing it over and over and over again, because he had finally ended the line of Quenelles, and he was very, very happy that this family, who had been a thorn in his side for half a millennia, was finally extinct. However, these engagements, Kemmler is kind of crazy at this point, because as the end times are going into full ascension, he starts getting stronger and stronger, which confuses Archon the Black a lot, and most everybody else, because when they last saw Kemmler at the Battle of Corone, he was pretty weak in comparison to how he normally was. But with the Dark Gods rising into ascendancy, they were also feeding power to Kemmler, and it showed because he was stronger than he had ever been. And Archon was beginning to get pretty worried about exactly what his goals were. In any event, Kemmler causes numerous problems. It's not exactly clear if he was deliberately causing issues to delay Archon's forces and hinder them so that the Dark Gods could be better skilled at dealing with the undead and preventing them from resurrecting Nagash, or if Kemmler was just being incredibly selfish. But in any event, his actions cause a ton of problems to the undead, and basically they get knocked down to the only caster still being alive are Archon and Kemmler himself. And they are the only ones animating the entire army, because all the other little necromancers get killed by random Bretonnians and the Beastmen, as the Dark Gods kind of weave their machinations to try and make Archon be marching to his death. Then Kemmler arrives at the final and 14th Battle of Lichemaster Abbey, where Kemmler plays a fairly critical role in the battle. At it, the defenders were led by Duke Theodric, who was a bear of a man wielding a very powerful magic axe. But while the battle was raging on, the undead essentially started to fall apart and be crumbling, and the reason was because there were three damsels who were essentially triplets, known as the Three Sisters of Anquilo, who were draining the entire undead army and basically started unleashing all of their magic onto Kemmler and Archon. And the three of them were incredibly powerful and had their magic, of course, tied into the land of Bretonnia itself, which, with Lichemaster Abbey being a blessed site, they had a ton of power to wield. The Kemmler basically takes them on 1v3, and the battle wages for a bit until Kemmler finally calls upon the power of the Dark Gods and realizes it, and instead of using necromancy against them, he instead uses pure dark magic and unleashes chaos sorcery against them. And this big black bolt of lightning comes flying out of the sky and obliterates the Three Sisters and their entire guard entourage of knights. Kemmler at this point seems to lose access to necromancy and fully commits to chaos, because there are some notes that the undead don't respond the way they're supposed to him, and he basically immediately blasts his way through his own army towards the abbey. Meanwhile, Archon is distracted because he gets his chest caved in by Theodric and would have died if it weren't for Krell. But as those two are busy fighting, when Archon finally stands up and looks around, he realizes that Kemmler is gone, and he's very perturbed that Kemmler might have betrayed them and Nagash, because the entire time they've been marching, Archon keeps telling everybody, okay, Nagash is our master. Nagash is our master. You know, we have to do what we can for Nagash. The world is ending, and the only way to save it is through Nagash. And he keeps repeating this over and over, and Kemmler keeps arguing with him, because Kemmler doesn't like the idea of a future of Nagash. Because in Kemmler's view, Nagash is a jealous, envious, and quite frankly, frightful creature. He's not really a god. He's a coward who won't be satisfied until everything that could possibly oppose him is dead. So he wants a world of complete, stagnant undeath where nothing can ever challenge him, nothing ever changes, and nothing ever moves. Kemmler doesn't like this because that obviously would require him to die and be a slave for all eternity. Whereas with the Dark Gods, there's at least a chance of moving around or up the ladder. So the two of them kind of have opposing views throughout the entirety of the build-up in the first half of the Nagash story. Finally, though, Archon goes into Lichemaster Abbey, where he finds that Kemmler has completely obliterated all of the guardians and the wards protecting it. And when he goes down into the crypt, he finds Kemmler holding Alakanesh, the staff of Nagash. The two have a bit of a debate for a bit, And Kemmler reveals a lot about his character throughout the timeline, which is essentially that when Kemmler made his original bargain with the Dark Gods, in addition to giving him back his power that he held before the Battle of 10,000 Skulls, the Dark Gods revealed to him that Nagash had basically been using him as a puppet all these years. When Kemmler originally discovered the poorly translated books of Nagash in his father's study, Nagash's spirit sort of reached out to him and kind of supplanted its will within Kemmler and was basically driving him on constantly and wanted him to accomplish certain things, and it gave him a lot of power, but at the same time he was sort of Nagash's unwitting servant. And this continued until the Battle of 10,000 Skulls, where for some reason, presumably because Kemmler was about to accomplish something that was not in Nagash's interest, that voice of Nagash, that sense of purpose, abandoned Kemmler during that battle, and it left him vulnerable, and that's what cost him his mind, his sanity, and all of his life, essentially. When the Dark Gods gave him back his power, they not only revealed that to him, but they also revealed to him how even finding Krell had been part of Nagash's machinations. Nagash had been the one to subtly guide him back to Krell, because Nagash wanted Krell to be a player in the Great Game again, because Krell is without a doubt one of the most loyal servants to Nagash. Even Archon the Black probably is not as loyal as Krell is, which is saying a lot, because Archon is very loyal to Nagash. In any event, after this big reveal, Krell, or the two of them, kind of have a discussion about which side is right, which side is wrong, and Archon and Kemmler have a duel. And during this duel, Archon essentially tries to raise the dead, and Kemmler completely shuts him down. And Archon realizes that the only way he's going to win this fight is if he can get Kemmler mad enough to make a mistake, and he sort of just starts taunting him. Eventually, he does piss off Kemmler enough that Kemmler kind of allows Archon to get too close, and the two of them start wrestling over the staff while just hurling magic at each other. And at this point, it becomes readily apparent that although they're evenly matched when it comes to lore, necromantic power, and all that stuff, Kemmler now has the Chaos Gods on his side, and his power just doesn't have a limit anymore. It just keeps going up, 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 up as he gets more angry. And at this point, Archon realizes that he's screwed unless something crazy happens, because he's not going to be able to match that. Like, his power has a direct focus limit. That's something Archon's very aware of and talks a lot about during almost the entirety of the end times. So Kemmler no longer has a limit. And basically it gets to the point where there's so much magic being unleashed that, unfortunately for Kemmler, he does have a limit that he just didn't realize, which is that he's mortal and he's human. And so what happens is essentially he overwhelms himself with too much power all at once in his rage, and it basically causes him to miscast on a pretty catastrophic scale, and he just implodes due to a insane amount of magical energy, and it literally detonates La Macentel Abbey. So the entire abbey explodes and masonry goes flying out in all directions, killing tons of people. And in the ruins of the aftermath, the only survivor of La Macentel Abbey, the actual building, is Archon the Black. Because although he did get hit with an incredible explosion of sorcerous fire, that's also kind of how Archon died the first time, and being a pretty powerful and well-constructed lich, he was mostly able to shrug off the miscast result. If the battle had been allowed to continue and Kemmler didn't blow up, it is very, very likely that Archon would have lost, but thankfully, Kemmler overreached himself before he was able to overcome Archon, because Archon was very clever and careful about how to handle it, and Kemmler lost control of his emotions because he's crazy. And that is how Heinrich Kemmler dies, which, as a fun note, Heinrich Kemmler was actually the very first special character in Warhammer Fantasy, like the entire setting. And most likely intentionally, he was also the very first special character in Warhammer Fantasy to die during the end times. So of all the acknowledged currently active special characters, he is the first one who dies. which is likely on purpose. But in any event, that is the end of Heinrich Kemmler, and thankfully a fairly short end time section. Alright, and with that, we are in the closing thoughts section, which I completely ad-lib, so forgive me if I say too many ums or something. In any event, thank you so much for joining me for this Halloween special of Heinrich Kemmler. I felt it was an appropriate video, as, you know, Halloween is very Vampire Counts themed, and Kemmler actually has a very fascinating backstory. And of course, now in Total War Warhammer Mortal Empires, you can actually play Kemmler as his own unique faction, the Barrow Legion, who have a unique start location in the Grey Mountains, and now you have all the awesome lore if you want to know all the fun, interesting, cool tidbits that you need in your holster to have either a lore-accurate or just fun campaign looking for little snippets of things that match up with his storyline. In any event, I do want to say that I have begun writing again, and it seems that I'm able to do it again, which is great because I was able to pump this out actually rather quickly. So hopefully Carrick 8 Peaks week will be the next major lore thing in our future. I just really wanted to knock out something for Halloween, and I felt inspired to take on Kemmler because I'm so excited for his private faction because it has such a cool color scheme, and I just love the start position, and there's just so many awesome things about it. In any event, I do want to say a special thank you to my patrons, of course, who have been very patient and supportive of everything I'm doing, and I really, really thank you guys. Y'all are kind of the only solid rock that I have financially. YouTube is very wild and like an ocean where tide comes in and out. Sometimes there are good months, sometimes there are really, really bad months, and lately it's been a lot of really bad months. So I appreciate you guys giving me the ability to stay afloat and pay my health insurance and be a functioning citizen in society. So thank you for that. For everyone else, I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it's been a really long time since the last Legendary Lord video, being Cetra the Imperishable, but hopefully I'm going to be able to put these out on a more regular basis, as I think I've discovered a strategy that lets me write on a pretty solid scale. You know, I was able to pump out a 10,000 word essay for this video in about 3 days, which was pretty nice. So hopefully we can get out Carrick 8 Peaks week before January 1st. That's my goal. In any event, thank you all so much for watching. If you want to support me in the channel directly, please consider visiting my Patreon link in the description below. It has various incentives, like when I do videos like this, you'll always get early access, so patrons will be enjoying the Heinrich Kemmler video a few days before everyone else. I think for the average person, he'll probably be going out on the weekend, maybe Sunday, and then for, you know, the patrons will just get it as soon as possible. For everyone else, yeah, thanks so much for supporting me. I hope you guys will be joining me on all the live streams, but I doubt I'll get this out in time before I'm live streaming the Vampire Coast DLC. But in any event, I hope you all are having a great day, and I hope you all really enjoyed this video, and it was just a fun, awesome thing to listen to a good solid hour and a half of everyone's favorite crazy madman, which probably the only thing I wasn't able to communicate as well in the story is that Kemmler really is a crazy guy after he gets his mind back from the Chaos Gods. Like, he talks to the zombies and undead a lot. He calls them his children. They nail that a lot in Total War. And he, of course, has a very nasty habit of, he likes to reanimate people that he's killed and play with them like toys. You know, make them do weird, goofy, you know, things that would be funny if it was like a child playing with clay, but it's not, because it's a 550-year-old man playing with corpses, and it's gross. In any event, Kemmler is one of my favorite characters in the setting. Easily the best Necromancer character in the setting, in my opinion. A lot of people like Van Hal. But I hope you all have a great day. I've already said that. Patrons, thank you all once again. Of course, the whole thing should have been up this entire time. And Eric the Red is the editor for these videos, so if you like these videos and the style of them, please let me know in the description below. Please give Eric your thanks. He would really appreciate it. And of course, if you haven't already, you should check out his YouTube channel, which he has a couple of really mind-boggling and hilarious animations on there. And overall, I'd really appreciate it if you guys could support him because of all the support he shows me. In any event, thank you all so much for watching. I will be seeing you a lot over the next following weeks. So yeah, have a great day, guys. Thanks for watching. Happy Halloween, even though it's late, but you know, that's me. Bye.